CIA. I have information that bin Laden's in Ladiz. This is their response to me. Mr. Chairman,
we're going to get right into
we've
it,
heard
guys.
similar
We're going to get right
reports.
into it.
We can either confirm or deny them. I was in shock. I was in shock. We're sending kids to die in Afghanistan, and we can't confirm or deny whether or not bin Laden's in Ladiz? 3 months go by. I'm still supporting the president. My intel team comes back to me and say, Curt, he's being treated at a military hospital outside of Tehran. I go back to the classified briefing and I ask the question in front of the full committee. And the answer from the CIA is, Mr. Chairman, we've heard similar reports. We can either confirm or deny that bin Laden is being treated at a military hospital outside of Tehran while we're sending kids to die in Afghanistan. I said, this is outrageous. And then, Tucker, I get a call from Jack Murtha, the most respected Democrat in the House, former Marine, who I work with closely. And he says to me, I want you to meet with Ron Klink, Democrat from Pittsburgh. And Ron Klink's still alive. He'll verify this, Tucker. Jack's dead, but Ron's alive. He said, Jack has a person who used to work for the agency that has information about Iran. And you investigate this kind of stuff, Curt. Will you meet with him? I said, sure. Ron Klink comes to my office and brings this very tall man who's a former person from the Swedish area, but he's a U.S. citizen. And I said, how can I help you? You know, Congressman Murtha asked me to help. Ron Klink wants me to help. He said, Congressman, I want you to help me get into Iran. I said, why do you want to go to Iran? He said, that's where bin Laden is. I said, why would you tell me that bin Laden's in Iran? He said, I was a knock for the agency. Do you know what a knock is?
Yeah, non-official cover.
That's right. He said, I was a knock for the agency, and I worked that area. And my friends are seeing bin Laden in Iran. If you help me get to Tehran, I'll leave my identity there. I'll get a piece of him, dead or alive, and I'll bring it back. At the time, there was a $25 million reward for bin Laden. I said, I can't help you right now because I'm in a battle over this follow-up to 9/11. Then I get another call, Tucker, from the Interior Department, totally separate. They want to bring in their top bird man, their bird expert. I didn't think that was unusual because I was the Republican on the Migratory Bird Commission. The Migratory Bird Commission.
No, there was a
it oversees all the flyways for all the refuges up and down the coast. I was the Republican.
Duck hunters like me, thank you, by the way.
John Dingell was a Democrat.
Of course, I've duck hunted with him, yeah.
2 senators and 3 cabinet members. So I figured they want to talk about birds. I'm on the Bird Commission. I'll meet with them. So this Interior Department bird expert brings in a U.S. citizen from Maine who's a Sikh, but he's a U.S. citizen, very wealthy family. And he's got 2 falcons on his shoulders, $1 million birds with the blinders on, beautiful, into my office. I said, good boy, they're gorgeous. How can I help you? He said, well, Congressman, I've devoted my life to falcons. He said, I helped write the UN protection treaties on falconry. He said, I trained all the children of the royal families in the sport of falconry.
Yes.
Because that's their sport. He said, they all know me, they all trust me, they
all
like
me. In the Arab world, it's huge.
Yes.
Yes.
He said, so, and I want to help the country, and there's a reward for bin Laden. I said, yeah, I know that. He said, I want you to help me go to Iran. I said, why do you want to go to Iran? Now, he knows nothing about anything else I'm doing. My falconers are seeing bin Laden's birds flying in Iran. You help me go to Iran, they'll accept me there because they know me. I'll tag his birds, and I'll take the U.S. to exactly where he is. That's four full source identities that bin Laden was exactly where my intel people said he was. Over the course of time, Tucker, I developed 10 silver bullets. They wanted to do a movie about me after they took me out, and I'll get to when they took me out. I got a call from Michael Scheuer. Michael was career CIA. After I was taken out of office, he called my home. He said, Congressman, do you remember me? I said, vaguely, Michael. He said, well, I was the chairman of the bin Laden task force in the CIA. And these people that have met with you have shown me documents I never saw when I was working in the agency. And I was the bin Laden task force director. He said, we want you to work with us. We want you to be involved in a movie we're doing. I said, Michael, after what they did to my family, I can't do it right now. I hung up the phone. I get a call from General McInerney. About 3 months later, Tom McInerney. He said, Congressman, you remember me? I said, yes, General, I remember you. He said, I'd like you to work with us, Congressman. I'm working with Michael Scheuer and the Falconer, and we want you to be involved. I said, I'm not getting involved after what they did to my family. They all had the same story, Tucker. So what was happening in 2006? All my elections were landslides.
It's one of the saddest things about this country. The country's getting sicker despite all of our wealth and technology. % off. We enjoy them. You will too.
But can I just ask you to pause for 1 second? So you had a lot of evidence, it sounds
Absolute evidence.
that bin Laden was not in Afghanistan or Pakistan,
Right.
where he was supposedly ultimately killed. Not in Iraq. He was in Iran. But Iran was also in the crosshairs of the Bush administration. It was part of the so-called axis of evil at the time. People were talking about invading Iran then. Why would the Bush administration hide the fact that...
It wasn't the Bush administration.
Oh?
Let me explain to you. And this is what Trump needs to understand. It started under Clinton, when the Clinton administration, Bill and Hillary Clinton, who I have no respect for, were allowed to be themselves to be used so they could make money. Tens and tens of millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars, because they allowed people, unscrupulous people, to control the agenda in Russia and around the world. And you've been going after some of this involving Russia. I can give you dozens of hard examples.
I believe it.
That
And
I
we've talked about this off camera, but I just want to get to specifically
Continued.
who was hiding the fact that bin Laden was in Iran and why.
Okay. It continued under Bush Jr.
Yep.
As I said, up until 2000, they wanted me to be chairman. All of a sudden, when I started questioning 9/11, all of a sudden the Bush people said, whoa.
Yeah, I bet.
John Sununu, after I was out of office, who I had a lot of respect for, was Bush's chief
smart
of staff.
man. Yeah, I know.
I was in his office, and they said this to me. He said, Congressman, you were a great member. Everyone respected you, but you made one fundamental mistake. I said, what was that, John? He said, when you come to this city, you're either on one rail or the other rail. And you went down the middle and took on both rails. I said, well, John, I didn't pledge allegiance to the Republican Party.
Yeah.
I pledged allegiance to the Constitution. You guys were ecstatic when I took on the Clintons, when I took on Sandy Berger, when I took on the scumbags and what they did with China and Russia. You were ecstatic. But then when I saw things happening at 9/11, all of us, he said, well, that's why you're not here. I said, you know what, John? So be it. It's not the end of my life. And one day I'll tell the story, John. One day I'll tell the story, because that's what America needs to hear. They need members of Congress who don't become duped by scumbags in the intelligence agency making money for themselves. And you know what, Tucker? I challenge them. I'll name them, and I'll give their dollar amounts of where they're making money today in the countries that we're at war with. They care about themselves and their power. They don't care about the lives of the kids that we send to war. I saw it in Libya. I saw it in North Korea. I led delegations that were bipartisan to all of those places. They took it out on my daughter.
So I just want to get one more time to the question of who was hiding the fact that bin Laden was actually in Iran. And
Our intelligence agencies, they have plausible deniability. In the end, I have 10 silver bullets, including 2 royal family members from 2 different royal families, from 2 different countries, including, in the end, the person that was in the room, who was a knock for our government for 50 years. He's not from the U.S. He's become a friend of mine. He's been to my home. We've met dozens of times. And on one of my trips to the Middle East, he said to me, he calls me, my dear, you were right. I said, about what? He said, about a lot of things. But you're right about bin Laden. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he was placed in Iran, in Baluchistan. He said, I said, he said, yes, I know that. He said, I was in the room when the deal was cut. So the U.S. has plausible deniability. If they weren't in the room.
Was the point to get to Iraq?
The point was to manipulate, to get our troops committed, to go over to fight the battles in Afghanistan, Iraq, and that whole region of the world.
Yes.
And they had to have the justification to do that.
I believe it.
But in the end, when 5 years ago, and even Trump doesn't know this, I'm sure, we killed someone that Trump took great credit for, and I applaud him for it. And he said, we killed this guy.
Soleimani?
That's right. Soleimani was the guy the deal was cut with. The deal was not cut with the Iranian government. And we need to understand that. And this is the heart of what we have to get to. The Iranian people are not our enemy. I wrote this book in 2005, Countdown to Terror. It's all about Iran. It says that the people of Iran are not our enemy. And this book was endorsed by Jim Woolsey, with a 3-page letter.
Former CIA director.
Former CIA director. This book was endorsed by Jack Caravelli, Gore's CIA advisor. They both endorsed my book. The book was so popular that the people of Iran published it in Farsi. There it is. And they published the book. Without my approval, they published my book. It became a bestseller in Iran because it said, you're not the enemy of the American people. Here's what happened, Tucker. When the Shah was in power, think back, we were best friends with Iran.
Of course.
Our intelligence people trained the Iranian intelligence people. We trained them. They were our people. When the radical Ayatollahs and the mullahs took over Iran, they did not bring in a new intelligence service. They did not change the agency. The IRG stayed the same. The deal to place bin Laden in Iran wasn't cut with the Iranian government. It was cut with Soleimani. And that's why we killed him. Our intelligence agency has tentacles around the world. And they're not answering to anybody. And that's the problem right now. That's the problem Trump has. Yeah, he can cut off the security clearance of 51, but that network extends far and wide around the world, and they can play all the games they want in Ukraine, in other countries. And until we go after that, this is not going to stop.
That's all consistent with what I've seen.
And,
I would say.
and that's
I don't think that's not a crazy statement.
That's the challenge that Trump has right now. I still think he's at risk. Last May I went on a TV show locally in the Philadelphia area, and I said my greatest challenge is they're going to try to take Trump out. A month later,
yeah.
they did the attack. You know, it goes back to when when I kept quiet because I couldn't trust any of the administrations after I left, including the Bush administration, because Bush wasn't in control. And I can give you example after example.
I saw
Bush
that.
not being in control. Yeah. I knew who was in control. When Trump was going in, I met with Rudy Giuliani. I had 2 private dinners with him up in New York. I had not known Rudy that well. I said, Rudy, this is what's going to happen. The deep state's going to undermine Trump. They don't want him. They will undermine him by removing his ability to understand how they operate. Before he took office, they took out General Mike Flynn.
Yep.
When they took out Flynn, Trump was like a baby in the woods. And for 4 years, they used the Congress and they used their connections to derail this country. That's the problem that occurred in the first Trump 4 years. This time, I'm trying to get Trump to realize he's got a great start. But the people around him don't know what they don't know. They don't have that historical understanding of what this just didn't happen with Trump. I mean, they took me out in 2006.
So let's get to that. They took you out in 2006, and that's kind of where this conversation began. I remember that very well, and it was
all right, guys. So this is Curt Weldon. You know, he's one of many that's been coming out to talk about the just the corruption within the intelligence agency, especially the CIA. And you know, we kind of already know that bin Laden and all these people were CIA assets, that they were just there to provide, again, like a face to the whole invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, even though neither of those countries had anything to do with 9/11. But obviously the ignorance of the, you know, rallying up the American public and stuff like that, the ignorance of the, you know, regional elements caused a lot of neocons, people in the government, even a lot of Americans who were supportive of the war, like, you know, for 20 years. And now they're kind of doing the same thing with Iran. So it kind of begs the question, like, do they have something planned, some type of event planned, you know, to rally the American public to support war with Iran? And we know that the CIA has so many rogue elements, and this is what pisses me off about these guys. They come out to expose these people, but he never wants to talk about the main component of all this, and that's the Mossad, right? Never wants to call out the Mossad and their influence on even the CIA and general American policies, man, foreign policies abroad, domestically. I mean, these people kind of fence it and don't go all the way in. But shout out to him for speaking out on this. So you got to think about it. Like, why are they allowing all these people to talk about all these covert operations in Iraq, Libya, Syria, Yemen, given the impression to several people in the United States that we live under a corrupt system, we live under corruption, and there's this. I'm telling you, man, like, they're definitely planning something, and it's fucking. It's kind of nerve wracking, but yeah, this guy should be. Some of the stuff he was saying honestly didn't make any sense, but we'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Anyways, man, let me know what you guys think in the comment sections down below, man. Like, comment, subscribe, peace.